If you didn't replace half, you would reduce federal employment by about 300,000 at least, and you'd save each year, forever, eternally, about $22 billion. And as Everett Dirksen used to say, what was it? He said, 1 billion, 2 billion, it finally starts adding up. I think in his days it was 1 million, 2 million. Nowadays it's 1 billion, 2 billion. If we're not careful, it's going to be 1 trillion, 2 trillion, and it really adds up. The second pillar of prosperity is one that you know really, really well, and that's lower tax rates. I favor, and I think we all do, lowering marginal tax rates to the lowest level possible. I believe that our economy grows when we give people more choice, more opportunity to handle their money, than if we have government bureaucrats trying to figure out how to handle it. That kind of expresses my philosophy probably in most areas, healthcare, schools, but it certainly does in this area of taxation. 4 presidents during the last 100 years have significantly lowered taxes. Coolidge was the first, Kennedy was the second, Reagan was the third, and our President Bush was the fourth. All of them passed across the boards major tax reductions, including in personal taxes. Each one of them was able to take an economy that was ailing, and the result of those tax cuts was to significantly improve that economy. At least in the last two situations that I can examine, Reagan and Bush, it had exactly the same impact that I had when I lowered taxes. They were collecting more money from the lower taxes than from the higher taxes. I saw that on a small scale in New York City, and I did the same thing in New York City. So when I talk about supply-side economics, particularly from the point of view of taxes, again, it's a theory I believe in, but it's something I actually did. It's something I actually accomplished. It's something that I actually understand. You know, you've heard this debate go on now for about 3 or 4 years. How can President Bush have cut taxes and taken us to war? Gosh, that doesn't make any sense. We have Democrats saying that. We even have some Republicans who have said that. If you've said that, you don't understand supply-side economics. And you're entitled not to understand it, but you don't understand it. Because the actual better question would be, if you're going to take us to war and you need more revenues, maybe you should lower taxes, because you're going to collect more money for the government. I understand that. That doesn't mean you can lower all taxes. It doesn't mean it works in every single situation. But you have to understand supply-side economics if you're going to get us through the next 10, 15, 20 years as a society that keeps growing. I believe, without any question, I'm the only candidate in this race who has so aggressively cut spending, reduced taxes, and lived out and proved the wisdom of supply-side economics. And I would apply that as President of the United States aggressively. Finally, with regard to taxes, we need to face a reality. The reality we need to face because of bracket creep, the alternative minimum tax, and the expiration of the Bush tax cuts. The federal tax share will rise 20% of GDP over the next few years, and about 24% down the road. This means that we need a president in the White House that will have to cut taxes just to keep us even. So if we don't have a president in the White House who is a committed tax cutter, we're going to see the benefit of these tax cuts disappear and kind of convert itself into tax rates and tax levels that we haven't seen in decades. Families and firms need the lowest possible marginal tax rates, and not magic tricks and gimmicks. One dangerous gimmick that's kind of lying out there is the 1/3 increase in the long-term capital gains tax that's just going to happen and explode on investors and the economy very early in the next president's term. The capital gains tax is, as you know, a second tax on income. Second taxes are inequitable, and they are very regressive and very, very damaging. And a high capital gains tax actually loses revenue. This may be the tax that is the most sensitive to reductions that actually get you more income. So if this one skyrockets again, we're going to see a massive impact on our capital markets. And combined with Sarbanes-Oxley and everything else, it could mean the American economy moving in the other direction. I have for many years been committed to reducing the capital gains tax as low as I can get it. Because I used to see it as the mayor of New York City as a jobs program for New York. You lower the capital gains tax, you get so much more activity in the market that you make it up very, very easily in just about everything else that's going on in your economy. So I would fight very, very hard to at least keep the capital gains tax where it is. And I would consider myself really successful if I could get them to lower it even more. The worst one of these gimmicks, though, even by Washington standards, that I think is just about mind-boggling, is the death tax. What's the euphemistic name for it? The inheritance tax, right? Isn't that the euphemistic? But it's the death tax, and it really has become a death tax, and I'll explain to you why it's become a death tax. That tax is going to disappear for 1 year, for the year 2010. There's going to be no death tax for the year 2010. And then starting in 2011, it's going to go way back up, I think, to 55%. It's going to take away more than half of your estate. I sure wouldn't want to be on a respirator in 2010. And if you think about this, this has got to be only Washington politicians, Democrat and Republicans, could have figured out how to create a tax incentive to die. If you've worked hard all your life and you've played by the rules and you've already been taxed on the money that you have and the money you put in the bank and the house that you bought and the farm that you bought, you've already been taxed on it to the tune of, with state and local taxes and everything else, maybe half of it, you've given it to the government already, somewhere between 35 and 50% of it to the government. Well, then it's totally ridiculous to have to, now when it moves on to a legitimate heir, to have to give up another half of it. So I would do everything that I could to give the death tax the death penalty. The third pillar of reform is regulatory reform. And we have to see regulatory reform almost as the same thing as taxation. In fact, it is, in terms of its effect, it's the same thing as taxation. The U.S. today really is at the point where we may be over-regulating ourselves to the extent of becoming anti-competitive. We're being hurt by really overzealous regulations, the excesses of Sarbanes-Oxley, an environment of hyper-litigation and shareholder lawsuits, and it can be poisonous to a private sector economy. Everyone agrees we need to enforce proper standards to protect health and safety and to ensure integrity and transparency in business. But we can't go to such an extent that we remove American ingenuity and that we put American businesses, little ones, medium-sized ones, and big ones, just in a terrible position where they just can't compete. When companies like Enron and WorldCom cheated shareholders, they were punished. As far as I can tell, they were punished to the full extent of the law, and they deserved it. But that doesn't say anything about the vast majority of American businesses, small ones and big ones. Most American businesses, like most Americans, are honest, they're decent, they're hardworking, and they're more than willing to be transparent. But they can't be over-regulated to an unrealistic extent. What happens to us, and I've witnessed this because I've been in government as a prosecutor and a high official in the Justice Department for years. We get one of these scandals. It kind of represents just a demonstration of the human personality, that in every walk of life we have people that are dishonest and cheats, and it happens in business, it happens in politics, it happens among lawyers, it even happens with the press. And then in at least the first three areas, we over-regulate. we've got to now look at the excesses of Sarbanes-Oxley and cut back on them. And we've had people say this, like our Treasury Secretary Paulson on one side, and my successor, Michael Bloomberg and Senator Schumer, have done a report explaining how Sarbanes-Oxley is hurting New York City and American markets. We've got to take it seriously. My goal would be, I'll tell you what my goal would be. My goal would be a balanced regulation. I'd say it should be fair and balanced. No, wait a second. Maybe that one would be too much of a plug for Fox News or something. But you get the point. I will be very, very concerned about regulatory reform. And during the course of this campaign, we will lay out some specific proposals about how to make Sarbanes-Oxley a lot more reasonable and how to deal with some of these excessive regulations so that we remove this heavy burden that we're placing on American businesses that only threatens to get worse, just like the taxes threaten to get worse in the future. The fourth and final pillar of prosperity is sound monetary policy. Nobody wants to go back to the bad old days of the 1970s when we had the worst of all worlds. We had stagflation. I don't know if everybody remembers what stagflation was. It was 13% inflation, 20% interest rates, devastating unemployment, and a Democratic president. Well, we've had a couple of Republican presidents, and we're not there anymore. And we got to stay there. The Federal Reserve Board is the ultimate and really it's the independent arbiter of monetary policy. And the appointments you make to the Federal Reserve Board are truly critical. They have to be people who understand that stable, low inflation is an input, not an impediment to durable economic expansions and strong economic growth. So if the Federal Reserve does its job, and if the president appoints the right people, and then on the other side of it, we do our job, and our doing our job means keeping taxes low, keeping spending under control, and keeping regulation under control, then inflation won't be a problem for us. And it'll sustain growth. If we make mistakes in these areas, we're going to go back to stunting our growth, and who knows, maybe stagflation again. Seems to be something that you can track to Democratic presidents and some of their ideas. I describe the ideas of the Democrats who are running, both on dealing with terror and dealing with the domestic economy, as they have a model in mind that they think would be wonderful for this country. I really believe this. They probably wouldn't describe it this way, but I think I'm right about this. They got a really great model in mind. They want to copy the governments of continental Europe. They want to move towards social democracy, or you might even say something else, on health, on taxes, on everything else. And they want to copy what they regard as the very successful way in which continental Europe dealt with terrorism, which was essentially to negotiate with it, to accommodate it, to appease it. And I can only say that when I see them over the last couple of days doing something extraordinary at a time of war. I've asked somebody who's a better historian than me to describe when, just when, ever, a nation decided to announce its retreat and give the schedule to their enemies. I cannot imagine announcing retreat and then saying, let me give you a printed version of exactly how we're going to pull our troops out so you can figure out when we're really depleted so you can come and attack us. This makes no sense. It can only come about because they're using that kind of continental European model of how to deal with terrorism, which is defensively. I believe we should use an American model for how we deal with terrorism. It's called being on offense. And if we don't stay that way, this is going to be a much worse situation for us than it has to be. So those are the four pillars of prosperity that I think we need. And I think it has to be, and that's a foundation for economic growth. It's a foundation for effective government. And there's a principle that has to be applied to it. And the principle that has to be applied to it is applying the principle of accountability. I believe that you have to run government like it's a business. I think you have to get government down to its core functions, but then you have to make those core functions effective. You've got to get them to work right. Competence is enormously important in government. And the core functions of a city government were a police department, a fire department. I didn't cut those, I expanded those. The core functions of a United States government, particularly at this time, is our national defense, our military. They need to be expanded to protect us better, and they have to be handled and measured more accountably. And nowadays, Homeland security, homeland defense, making us secure, that's a core function of the government. That's one of the reasons we created government in the first place. So I believe that those have to be managed like a business. And here's the concept I had in New York City, and here's the concept I would apply to the federal government. It's called the CompStat concept, and that is you measure what you get. Treat government agencies like they're a business. We did that with the police department. We set up a CompStat program. We measured crime reductions instead of arrests, and we got a 57% reduction in crime by making the police department accountable. We did the same thing with the welfare office. Instead of measuring the success of the welfare office as how many people have you put on welfare, we measure the success of the welfare office as how many jobs did you get for people. And we reduced welfare by 640,000. We treated the welfare office as if it were a business, and we created an indicator of success. The United States government needs CompStat programs for every one of its agencies. If it had CompStat programs, we would not have some of the mistakes that have been made over the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. A CompStat program, I believe, would have prevented Katrina. A CompStat program would make us more secure at home. It would make Homeland Security work effectively. And the American people are entitled from their federal government to security and competent, business-like performance. And again, I believe I'm the only candidate for office that has a record of accomplishing those things, and I would carry that record and that experience into being President of the United States. So I have to confess to you, I'm an optimist. I can't imagine being anything else. I don't think if I were an optimist, I would have been able to get through September 11. I don't think if I were an optimist that I'd be able to get through prostate cancer. My wife helped me accomplish both of those things and got me to think optimistically about that. And I'm very, very optimistic if we make the right choices about the future of the American economy and in our effort to defeat the terrorists in their war against us. This is our opportunity, for our generation to make its contribution to the cause of freedom. That's the great contribution of the Republican Party. That's what we do when we are at our best. We define ourselves when we're at our best by what we're for, not by what we're against. That's how we draw millions of people to us, and that's how we become a majority party. People are drawn to positive things. That's why our most successful Republican in the last 40 or 50 years was Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was known for what he was for. What he was against was a footnote. What he was for was the major part of the text. And we've got to accomplish that. And what I'm for is freedom. More freedom for people here at home, more freedom for people abroad, more security for us, which yields more freedom, a lowering of the burdens of government, and I think we're on the same page. So I invite you to support me. Thank you very much. Thank you.